I do think right now with movies like this, we can get stuck in a rut in this industry. And this is a reflection of the fans maybe not getting what they expected, like Scott is saying, but also the people that are just wanting to see an interesting movie in theaters, not really caring about coming to see a sequel like this. This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, we are going to go over the October slate at the box office, previewing all the major wide-released feature films hitting a theater near you. And in our panel this week, we've got our usual co-hosts and panelists, my colleagues, Pahle and Chad Kennerk from Box Office Pro, and our guest panelist this week, over from Puck News and his newsletter, The Outside Scoop, Scott Mendelson. Scott, your debut appearance here on the Box Office Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. You were nice enough to guest on my little podcast about a few weeks ago, so I figure quid pro quo.
It works out perfectly, and great timing here because we're going to be going over a number of movies that we're currently tracking at the box office for an important month, obviously setting up a Q4 that the entire industry is hoping will push us closer to that $8.5 billion mark for the year. That's currently the Box Office Pro forecasting panel's prediction for where 2024 is going to finish in the domestic market. Still behind last year's $9 billion, but let's not forget, when the year started, a lot of folks were saying 8 to 8.1. If we can get to 8.5, I think we can all mark that as a win.
Looking at the calendar, I was afraid it might end up closer to 2021, so I'm very glad to be wrong.
Yeah. No, I think we were all very conservative, understanding that this was going to be a year where the strikes were going to give us a very big hangover, which happened. It's a tale of two halves of the year, right? Everything before June 14th and Inside Out 2, basically everything before Disney decided to start releasing movies in theaters, and everything after Disney decided to start releasing movies in theaters. And man, I mean, that's my one lesson of this year so far is it's a different industry with Disney in it. So let's get into the news segment real fast before we get into our October preview. Rebecca, you're a North Carolina native. Of course, North Carolina being in the news quite a bit this week. Unfortunately, a major hurricane really destroying a large part in many communities across the state. We are going to tackle this from our angle, of course. From the exhibition side, we know of a lot of art houses, movie theaters are currently affected by the situation. How can folks in this industry and outside that want to help theater workers and the theatrical industry get involved in this really rebuilding effort?
Yeah, and we definitely wanted to shout out the Will Rogers Pioneers Association Foundation. Again, this is a group that for decades now has been built in order to help cinema workers, people who work in the exhibition industry. Like you said, Daniel, I mean, this is just, you know, it was a hurricane that came through, but it was a hurricane that came in like inland 300 miles west of the coast. So it was definitely something that people were not expecting to be as bad as it was. So if you are affected by Helene, there is a natural disaster assistance fund that the Will Rogers Foundation has set up. You can go to wrpioneers.org/natural disaster, one word there, and you can send in your application to get some grant, to get some help. Typically for the Pioneers Assistance Fund, Daniel, as you know, you have to have worked in the industry for 3 years in order to be eligible for it. That is not the case with the Natural Disaster Assistance Fund. So you can have worked for a cinema for a week. And if you find that you're in the position where you've been affected by Helene and you need that help, yeah, definitely go to wrrogers.org because that is literally what they are there for, to help you out in these times.
And that applies not only to cinema owners, but also cinema workers. We know that the Pioneers Fund also helps cinema workers whose job security might have been affected by natural disasters like this. wrpioneers.org. Great resource in this industry that's been helping many generations in this industry over the years with situations like this one. We'll continue tracking the stories coming out of North Carolina, that rebuilding effort, that reopening effort, really across a number of communities there in the coming weeks. But we do have other news to tackle here in the world of streaming and theatrical, which is a lot more intertwined that maybe some folks might think or know. So last year, guys, you might remember the headline that we didn't carry at Box Office Pro, ago because we could not confirm it, but you saw a major publication, a financial publication, claim that Apple was preparing a $1 billion commitment to theatrical releases. I think that struck everyone on staff here at Box Office Pro as unlikely, to say it kindly, because they didn't have a staff basically in place.
I was like, who's doing this? Who's responsible for making this? Is it elves coming into the Apple offices overnight? Like,
we were very confused by that headline, but it was, you know what, that might be true. They might start building something out in LA. We don't know. A year later, that same financial publication walking back that headline and saying, no, never mind. Apple will still spend $1 billion on a film slate, just not on theatrical. The report claiming 1 to 2 films going to theaters and the rest going to streaming. Scott, when I was on your podcast a number of weeks back, we went into detail on what this could mean. I mean, what's your take on this? Because I know before we started recording, you mentioned that you really did think that Apple at this time last year probably did plan a $1 billion to theatrical or a commitment to theatrical. That's not the case now.
If you remember in 2019, early 2019, Amazon went on a buying spree at Sundance. They spent like $46 million on movies like Late Night and The Report and Brittany Runs a Marathon, with the idea that they were going to make these theatrical mainstream releases, and that was going to be their thing. Unfortunately, they realized, as myself and others had been weeping about for years, is that nobody goes to the movies to see just a movie studio programmers anymore. They haven't since the mid-2010s. Those films all bombed embarrassingly. And sure enough, by the end of the year, even before COVID, they were pulling back on that theatrical strategy. I would argue that's probably what happened here, that they went into it with the intent of releasing films like Argylle and Wolves and F1 and Fly Me to the Moon in theaters. As the entertainment strategy guy coined it before me, it was called the Argylle treatment, which is where you put a, all due respect, terrible movie like Ghosted on streaming and nobody pays attention to it. Whether anyone watches it on streaming, who the hell knows? But you put a not great movie like Argylle in theaters and it bombs, and then you get weeks of box office bomb headlines. And for what good cause? And I think, as simple as it is, I think Apple was just frankly too thin-skinned to deal with the negative headlines that they were getting when films, good and bad. I think Fly Me to the Moon is fine. I have issues, it's too long, it's whatever. But, if they put that film just on streaming or on limited theatrical release, they get treated like Netflix, where they get credit just for it existing. Did anyone actually watch Hitman on Netflix after the first 10 days? We don't know.
I mean, they're coming into an established ecosystem with established players too. I mean, Disney has something that performs under expectations critically or commercially. They probably have another one coming out in 2 weeks.
Yes.
The system kind of moves on and they have the know-how to kind of move past it.
My frustration with Apple, beyond just, them not sticking it out, is, a film like Argylle is basically an example of what Hollywood theatricals were doing wrong in the 2010s, which is, it's a franchise. It's a trilogy before anyone even sees a frame of the film. And it's like an approximation of what a theoretical, stereotypical Hollywood tentpole looks like.
It feels very AI generated in a way.
And again, it's a better film than like Ghosted or Red Notice or whatever. I don't want to be too much of a schmuck. And for the record, when people throw around 100 million this, 200 million that, that's usually what Apple paid for the package. It's not what the budget of the movie was. And so if you tell me that Apple paid 200 for Argylle, but maybe they only spent 100 million on the production, it looks like $100 million movie, better or worse. But again, my concern is that, again, people don't see movies like Wolves in theaters anymore. They haven't for almost a decade.
And they do to a certain extent. I mean, you definitely have some of these smaller movies from distributors like Focus or Searchlight that they're succeeding on a smaller scale at these art house, at these independents, but it's not on an Apple scale, nor is it really intended to be.
And that's what I'd argue Amazon Prime, to a certain extent, or whatever they want to call themselves today, is doing correctly. They are using
Amazon MGM Studios?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Very confusing. What they are doing is they are using the theater to streaming pipeline for theatrical films that need to raise awareness and need to have more prestige and to be a bigger deal when they come to streaming. So I would argue they're taking films like Challengers and Blink Twice and putting them in theaters knowing that they need a little bit of juice. While something like Jake Gyllenhaal's Roadhouse remake or the Anne Hathaway, the very idea of you, which is very good, where you just have the thumbnail and that's enough to sell it on Amazon Prime Video.
Yeah, Netflix uses theatrical as a part of their marketing campaign, which is as long as theaters make money on it, like, I'm cool.
But the problem is when you're doing that strategy with movies that have to make tentpole money, then it's not going to work.
Yeah.
God forbid these guys market these movies is the other thing.
Yeah,
I'm surprised that the marketing spend has been so paltry for most things coming out of Apple. We can't be unfair. Of course, I think Napoleon had a very visible marketing campaign, and so did Killers of the Flower Moon. And I don't think it's a coincidence. Those are two films that performed really along the expectations of what movies like that performed to. I think we also have to be very sensitive in not portraying the high end of what a movie could potentially make at the box office as the standard or the expectation. We have to understand that the market is where it is, still very much in a rebuilding phase from COVID, that older audiences still haven't come back, not the way they had before 2020. And we have to understand that films marketed towards that demographic need a little bit more patience in the marketplace. But ultimately, I think it's fair to say that a company that is very much an outsider to the space, that came in expecting maybe to be a disruptor, has failed to disrupt much of anything. If anything, their films seem outdated, completely out of touch with modern audiences, with a theatrical strategy that has not delivered really anything of note for exhibitors, for audiences alike. And despite buying, and that's what they did, they bought an Academy Award, despite having a Best Picture Oscar, has not been able to turn that into anything of note at all. So best of luck to our friends over at Apple TV Plus. I enjoy your hardware. I'm sure there's a dozen people out there that enjoy your shows. What we have to say is not an outsider company to this space that is seeing the benefits of having a robust theatrical strategy that, ta-da, feeds into a streaming strategy. Disney just got to celebrate its top film premiere on Disney Plus of the year. And guess what movie it was? It's the highest grossing movie of 2024 at the box office. Look at that. They can both coexist and they can both help each other succeed. Streaming and theatrical, who would have thought? Inside Out 2 is now the #1 film premiere on Disney Plus of the year, driving over 30 million views globally in the first 5 days. And it is also the #1 film premiere ever on Disney Plus in both the EMEA and Latin America markets. Great success from Disney here with a more balanced theatrical and streaming strategy that we're seeing this year. Probably the most balanced we've seen from Disney Plus since launch. And they have the numbers to show for it. I think that's fairly good signs of where we're at. That basically sums up where we are in the streaming side of the conversation, because we do have to talk about theatrical quite a bit. And let's move over to Chad here real quick to go over some of the headlines going on in the world of exhibition. We've got a new theater, well, an existing theater, reopening in Missouri under a different operator, and an old mainstay of the Houston community also reopening under a new operator and helping out the arts house scene there. Chad, let's start with Missouri. What do we have going over there in Warrensburg?
B&B Theaters is assuming operations of the AMC Classic there in Warrensburg, Missouri. That's effective October 31st. And Samco Properties is actually investing over $2 million to upgrade that space before it reopens.
This is something that B&B has always done throughout its 100-year history. They look at different towns in the country, see where there is a need for a movie theater, and understand that the standard of a modern movie-going experience is really going to make the difference between surviving in this industry and not. And they're coming in partnership with the local community to really upgrade that space. In a similar upgrade, renovation, reopening news, finally, Houston's River Oaks Theater is reopening this week on Thursday. What can you tell us about that renovation?
Yeah, it's been a 2-year, multi-million-dollar restoration and modernization, Culinary Concepts stepping in to rejuvenate that space. I got to profile the theater in our October issue, and it was really fascinating to learn about that history and how much the community supports and loves that theater. So it's going to be a really exciting combination theater restaurant space.
some of the people involved in it are also involved with Star Cinema Grill. So we want to shout them out for kind of coming in and helping save this historic theater that just has been so valuable to the art cinema scene in such a big city like Houston. It's definitely good to see chains stepping in and into working with some of the classic cinemas in the area. Not Classic Cinemas, a movie chain.
Well, it was a former Landmark, or operated by Landmark for a while,
That's
right? The
right.
River Oaks, Landmark had to leave, and it was great seeing another local player. I know Star Cinema Grill has a couple of locations in Houston. I've actually been to one. Very modern sort of concept that they have over there on the dine-in space. A different deal coming into the River Oaks Theater here. And as Chad mentioned, if you want to learn more about that project, don't miss the October print edition of Box Office Pro magazine. Let's now go over our October preview here at the box office, because we are going to be going over some of the major wide releases to hit theaters. Of course, there's a lot more movies coming, but let's start here on a business basis, what exhibitors can expect on opening weekend from some of these titles. Let's start with this one, guys, because it's coming out on Friday. Joker Folie, Deux, or how I'm going to call it from now on to forever, Joker 2. Wow, I mean, I know, Scott, you saw this last night, so we'll bring you on in a little bit to go over what audiences can expect from this. But I do have to preface this conversation by saying I've been here at Box Office Pro for 11 years now, covering this industry. I've never personally forecasted any title. That's not my position. That's not what I do.
We leave it to the exhibitors who know what they're doing.
Yeah, we leave it to the professionals to come in and give us their numbers. And just to contextualize this conversation, to frame this conversation, a lot of the forecasting we do before the pre-sales period is based on tracking trailer views, social media buzz, Google searches. There's a lot of online data out there that we can compare to similar films and their performance that will indicate how a film will perform. Based on those metrics, something like the Joker sequel, coming out of an established movie that, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the highest grossing R-rated films, came out not that long ago, pre-pandemic, 2019, 2018, if I'm not mistaken. It had an established IP behind it, an Academy Award win for its lead actor, who's coming back. They'd added Lady Gaga, who has enough credibility at the box office with movies like A Star is Born. We also looked at the performance of another R-rated comic book movie this summer that broke all sorts of records. And everything indicated to us before the pre-sales period began that this would easily open above $100 million. Easily. I think our initial forecast that we published online probably had something like 115, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. And then the pre-sales period began. And boy, did our numbers start shrinking, and it's gone down ever since the pre-sales period has started. We haven't seen this title pick up at all, not at any juncture.
In some titles, pre-sales are more important. Some titles, you expect more walk-ups, typically with movies involving, older audiences, but something that's really fan-oriented like this, where, typically you have people waiting to buy those tickets the minute they go on sale. So this is definitely the sort of movie where it raises some eyebrows, raises some concerns. Maybe, in a best possible world for Joker 2, people are kind of waiting to see how some of that word of mouth is. The word of mouth from critics, from reviewers, and including Scott. Not so
not
good.
as good. And Scott, we have to hear what you thought. First, I have to give out the headline here that we have. We're currently tracking this between $50 to $75 million on opening weekends. It's far, far from that $100 million lock we had before the pre-sales period started. There's a chance here, because, again, we're surprised by just how lagging these sales are, that $50 million might not even be the floor for something like this. We might even be talking about mid to low 40s if things don't go right in the coming days. Scott, you saw the film. Is there anything positive to say?
No.
Days before release.
With the caveat that I'm wrong at least as often as I'm right. Google Top Gun Maverick Forbes Scott for 2 years. I never thought this one was going to be as big as the first one, even from inception, for the simple reason that Joker had this weird mix of Oscar buzz right out of the gate. It had a month of the media basically trying to goad this film into inspiring a mass shooting and or riot.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, I
had a
don't know if
lot
you
of
remember that
free
madness.
publicity, and no publicity
Yeah,
is
and
bad
it
publicity, at
created
least with
a
Joker.
fear of missing out moment that made it this weird, scary, dangerous, transgressive picture, which of course it was not if you've seen it. This did not have that. This is just a movie. Also, there is a history of sequels to films that ridiculously overperform, that end up becoming seen as disappointing merely because the sequel ends up making about what we expected from the first
Which is
one.
completely unfair. Like,
Neighbors 2, Wakanda Forever, The Last Jedi. But these films were generally commercially successful. The issue with Joker is that it's a $65 million original that spawned, allegedly, a $200 million sequel. So if it pulls a Secret Life of Pets and drops by like 50%, that's a problem, because this isn't a $75 million movie that might struggle to hit 400 million. This is a $200 million movie that's going to struggle to hit 400 million worldwide. And the big, the reason why the early tracking might have been off, partially beyond just, whatever, the reviews. And then when the reviews came out of the festival run, it wasn't that the film was bad, because whatever, tentpoles get bad reviews all the time. It's that the reviews were accurately, I would argue, telling you that not only the movie isn't particularly good, it is boring, it is not committed to what it is promising, in that it is not transgressive, it is not disturbing, it is not scary or shockingly violent. It does not run with the bonkers bananas notion of having an R-rated comic book superhero sequel starring Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn in a transgressive, full-on musical adventure. The idea of Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn in an R-rated bonkers bananas musical was in itself something that could have mitigated the whole, well, just because I was curious the first time doesn't mean I want a franchise factor, which, that happens all the time with films like, the Smurfs. Just because people showed up once because, hey, it's a live-action Smurfs movie, that's interesting, doesn't mean they're going to keep wanting sequel after sequel after sequel. Yet we keep getting sequel after sequel because that's the way the industry works. So no, there's nothing. The film is dull. The film is not particular. It is weirdly tame.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Listen, I'm not a comic book guy. You guys know that. I enjoyed that stuff when I was 11, when I was 12. There's been some movies that I've found entertaining in my adult life. I don't want to completely discount it. I think as something that we could probably call a genre today, there's definitely been high watermarks and low points. And I found Joker, the 2019 one, to be interesting in a genre and in a series of films that I really don't have any interest in. I thought that if you could give me like the Miller Lite version of a Scorsese movie with a supervillain, I found that okay. I mean, it's better than me sitting through dumb jokes on a Thor sequel. I'll watch this. And I came out thinking like, hey, you know what? If I'd never seen a Scorsese movie, my mind would be blown. And as someone that loves Scorsese movies, this is a pretty good superhero movie based on what that is. And it's, it's admittedly so. It didn't steal from anything. I think it showed its influences on its sleeve. And I appreciated that as a standalone. When we get into, is this a franchise? ? I think we lose the plot on a lot of these movies. Yeah. And this is really my feeling about the Barbie movie as well, by the way. I think a lot of the success of the Barbie movie, the overwhelming success of the Barbie movie from last summer, really came from this being, it wasn't a revolutionary feminist film, give me a break. It was an interesting film with a message that I didn't expect to be there. Mm-hmm. And I had a great time watching it.
Just the circumstances of Barbenheimer and, all the effort that Warner Brothers put into it.
Exactly.
I mean, it was lightning in a bottle is a phrase.
And I had a great time watching it. Yeah. But is it a franchise? I don't think we should ask that question of everything. And right now, there's been so many different Jokers floating around. I can't make sense of it. I don't care enough to make sense of it. I'm not a Star Wars guy, so I'm not right now plugged into the whole conversation of what's happening between the series and the movies. Right now, what the Warner Brothers Max TV to theatrical pipeline is doing, if you're not plugged in, can be a little confusing. Admittedly, I also like Matt Reeves' The Batman quite a bit. So when I heard there was going to be like a soft sequel to The Batman as a TV show on Max, which is also completely unrelated to the other supervillain content happening right now in theaters, so they're not connected at all, but they're happening concurrently.
And then I was like, all right, James Gunn and
I'll go watch this Penguin show. And what I found was a Miller Lite version of The Sopranos, which is like, okay, that's fine. Am I going to stick around for 10 hours to watch a heavily made up Colin Farrell lead me through Miller Lite Sopranos? I don't care enough. I don't have that much time for it. So even people that, like myself, aren't part of that core audience that were in for opening weekend of Joker in 2019, people like myself that are willing to give it a shot and like something in week 2, week 3, week 4, based on word of mouth, based on novelty, I'm out of this. I don't have another 3 hours to dedicate into this world because I don't care enough. As much as I like that original Matt Reeves, the Batman, I don't feel like dedicating 10 hours to watch a TV show in the same universe. And I'll say this even on things that I am a fan of. I love the Rocky movies. I talk about the Rocky movies in almost every episode. I don't need a Rocky animated series or a Talia Shire spinoff.
Burgess Meredith, the origin story.
Like Adrian's Quest. I don't need any of that crap. Just give me a movie every 3 years if you have to, entertain me, and let's move on with this. I do think right now with movies like this, we can get stuck in a rut in this industry. And this is a reflection of the fans maybe not getting what they expected, like Scott is saying, but also the people that are just wanting to see an interesting movie in theaters, not really caring about coming to see a sequel like this. I don't know why this got made. And I understand the first one was supposed to be a standalone, and I could not be less interested on something like this in theaters.
Yeah, Joaquin Phoenix winning the Oscar for playing the Joker should have been just take that victory lap and
just go.
Chad,
you've been quiet. Chad's been quiet, not saying anything. Are you the biggest Joker fan here, at least, or are you with us here?
No, I saw the first one. It was, I think my thoughts are similar to yours, Daniel. I'll have seen it by the time this episode comes out at a press screening, so I'll let you know next week what I think. But yeah, I'm going to check it out, but mostly for Lady Gaga, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that's probably the one bright spot. I'd be like, yeah, it'd be cool seeing Lady Gaga, but I was like, oh, do I have to watch all that Joker stuff again?
She has other movies. She does other stuff now. She's everywhere.
Yeah, I'd rather listen to an album, honestly.
And I think this is a problem for the industry. I mean, it's been a problem for the industry overall, is that you're catering to a fan base that wants to only watch this stuff. Like they only want all, if it were up to them, they'd watch nothing but DC and or Marvel.
That's
content.
a great point.
And that's what was revolutionary about the MCU in the first place, is that it got people in who didn't.
But I will be critical of that. I think you might be going there, Scott, and correct me if I'm wrong in misinterpreting what you're saying here. But for me, I have no patience that the only romantic comedy that gets made is one that has stormtroopers in it. Like, I have no patience for that. For me, that doesn't spell out like, oh, look how creative the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Star Wars galaxy is. That just tells me you're unwilling to accept anything slightly different unless it conforms the very small niche of 11-year-old boy entertainment that was sold to you in the 80s. I don't find this to be an interesting industry.
It's a tragedy.
If that's how we're headed.
Because even in the mid-2010s, when Kevin Feige was selling Phase 2 as, an approximation of genre films, at least there it was like, okay, but you have to have seen these films, these, 3 Days the Condor or whatever, to get the joke, if you will. But now in the late 2010s, and I think especially in the 2020s, I think the MCU and to a lesser extent DC is trying to bank on people that think the Batman is the greatest movie ever made because they haven't seen the films that inspired Seven, Silence of the Lambs, etc., Saw, etc., etc. And they think that for them, the Penguin is this grim, dark crime drama masterpiece because they don't know what it's taking from. And I think to a certain extent, that was why Joker was as popular as it was in 2019, because if you grew up in the 2010s and the only thing you watched was Pirates, Transformers, Marvel, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Batman, etc., 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 then to you, getting a movie that feels like an 80s Scorsese film is like the most amazing thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost duplicitous how they're now capitalizing on a generation that hasn't seen anything else. So for them, Black Widow is amazing because they've never seen Atomic Blonde or The Bourne Supremacy or whatever.
I think it's fair reasoning, but I also want to just clarify. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, Scott, but that's definitely not a bad thing. I mean, when we were growing up, we had the same circumstances of watching these movies and having our minds expanded and our minds blown. And then it's like, well, you didn't see when Pahle and Pressburger did it better. Everyone needs an entry point.
I mean, we are seeing, I think, an expansion here in younger audiences leaning into art houses, which I think is important. My concern, I think, is it complements a little bit what Scott is saying here, because I think we share a lot of that frustration. There's a difference between criticism and frustration, right? I don't want to be the cranky guy in his 40s saying like, "Oh,
kids today."
Well, that's my job. That's my job.
No, but I do think there's a failure of curiosity at play that can hurt film culture at large. So, for example, I call these things gateway movies or gateway books. The way like the DARE anti-drug program called something a gateway drug, right? If you do one thing, you're going to get into every single drug out there. I never had that thing with drugs at all, thank God. But I did have that with books. I did have that with movies. When I watched something like Pulp Fiction, I wasn't aware of the French New Wave. I had no idea what happened and all those references. But I watched Pulp Fiction, at age maybe 13, 14. And I was like, oh man, there are filmmakers out there that can play with film grammar. And that opened a door to Jean-Luc Godard. If you have that curiosity to go down the corridor and down the tour or down the tunnels to see what happens, what else you can explore, I think there's something positive. And that's why I will compliment a movie like The First Joker, because I think The First Joker, like Scott says, will give you little tastes and little hints of what was out there before. The first Captain America's
Winter Soldier was very
Winter Soldier.
That's
That's a great example, right? Something that you're like, hey, this reminds me a little bit of a different type of movie. That's interesting. It doesn't, it's not a ripoff. It wears its colors on its sleeve, and that's fine. But you need to have that curiosity baked in. If you don't, you end up having a lot of genres having to conform to the house style of what these things are. And I don't think that helps creativity. I don't think that helps film culture. It's hard to leave the culture when you're being so reactive, and you have to play it safe. And I'm sorry, working with these IPs is the definition of playing it safe. Let's move on to the other films, guys, because we're going to get into a rabbit hole here. Basically, as much of Joker 2 as I think we ever want to talk about in our lifetimes. And I have a feeling that not too many people will be talking about it for much longer after opening weekend.
And it's a shame because on paper, it's what we say we want from our franchise tentpoles. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. No, not in this case, at least. Let's go to the weekend of October 11th. We've got the opposite of Disney coming here, Terrifier 3.
Ooh.
Now, of course, this is a franchise that is self-admittedly rough around the edges, self-admittedly not part of the mainstream.
Proudly just gory and horror and not intended to be initially a wide release franchise. It's a success story. It's a real sweet success story.
So if we talk about the transgressive, edgy clown R-rated movie, the one that comes from the major studio the weekend prior probably fails at that description. And if you really want to commit to that idea of upsetting as many people as possible with an R-rated clown, these Terrifier movies, that's what they do. Of course, a very different sort of break-even point when you talk about a horror movie like this, truly, truly independent horror movie like this. We are expecting a $5 to $10 million opening weekend. Now, of course, our listeners that aren't in the industry might be alarmed. Hey, that doesn't sound like a lot of money. Guys, that is a ton of money.
It's iconic releasing. It's an event cinema distributor. I mean,
that is coming out and putting out this movie, and I am already seeing major chains adopt a movie like this.
There's a popcorn bucket. There's an Art the Clown popcorn, and you see. I mean, it's so interesting the way they're doing. You're seeing. Half price tickets for the second one coming back to theaters. If you get a ticket for the third one, I'm really the marketing on this one is really, really innovative and interesting.
It up. Yeah. They're ramping up a theatrical first campaign. They're working with major exhibitors. So in the world of something like horror, yes, $5 to $10 million isn't going to create a lot of headlines. But in a world of a movie like Terrifier 3, knowing what the first and second did in the marketplace, for it to get major national exhibitors behind it and get this sort of interest, we have to frame this $5 to $10 million opening weekend as a great success for this title. Now, I will not be seeing this movie just because it's not for me. Not everything has to be for us. Watching a movie isn't endorsing a movie. But in this case, nah. I'm out. Are you guys into gross clown horror?
You
Anyone
know me, I
watching this?
love horror movies, and I'm
You're
just not. I'm not going to do the movie a disservice of watching it when I know I'm probably not going to like it.
Exactly. Like, my opinion on this, totally irrelevant. Chad, are you in on this? Is it a date night for you?
Probably not. I'm in a similar boat to Rebecca. I think I've been aware of these films for a long time, but I haven't gone out of my way to see them. I love horror as well, but maybe not so much the heavy gore side of things.
Yeah. Scott, you got to help us out here. Is anyone here
yeah,
going to watch this
I'm
movie?
Team Art the Clown all the way.
All right, you're going.
My first date with the woman I eventually married was opening night of Saw 2, Her Choice.
Nice.
Okay,
Nice.
I
So
mean,
this is your date
that is
night movie,
good.
right?
That is
Yeah.
solid. Yeah, I'm into it, man. I completely defend that. I love it.
As someone that didn't even like the first Saw 2 for me is the one. It's the Star Trek, it's the Wrath of Khan of the series, and then set the template for the franchise as we know it, more so than the somewhat disassociated Star Trek motion picture. But I digress. Terrifier was a film I caught on a whim on Netflix, and it was one of those films that was like momentarily popular on Netflix, like everything is for 10 seconds, as Andy Warhol will say. And I figured it was just because it's a killer clown movie that played on Netflix as it was in theaters. So when they said, hey, we're making a sequel, I thought, oh, okay. But, everything's popular on Netflix, so be careful. I was wrong. They self-funded, I think, $500,000 or something. And it's a better movie than the first one. It's really long. It's like 130 minutes. And a lot of that does go into character development. A lot of it just goes into just wacky bananas visual, just weirdness for the sake of weirdness. It is, of course, very graphic. Like the first one, it's basically normal R-rated violence with one scene that just goes completely off the rails. I don't know if the third film is like that too. I've not seen it yet because they scheduled last night's screening on the same night as Joker 2. Go figure. This is very much going to be a breakout sequel. And when I think of a breakout sequel, I think of something that does well in theaters, but maybe doesn't blow anybody's doors off. But it starts slow, legs out, gets word of mouth. It does well in theaters, like the first Austin Powers, which was a theatrical success, contrary to popular belief. But then people discover it in post-theatrical, and then, 2-3 years later, the sequel comes out and just blows the doors off the predecessor on opening weekend because you have all that earned goodwill that all shows up at the same time. Scream 2, John Wick 2, Pitch Perfect 2, on a tentpole scale, Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and The Dark Knight. And I think one of the reasons that Marvel was so dominant in the 2010s is they kind of turned the breakout sequel into an assembly line process where most of their part twos perform noticeably better than their part ones. So yeah, do I think this one's going to open to 5 to 10 million? Yes. If it goes bonkers and goes closer to 15, would I be surprised? No, but it doesn't have to be successful. And as far as, horrifying and offending people, I can't imagine anyone accidentally walking into this movie and not.
Yeah, you know what you're walking into. I feel you have to know. And then the film is very
if anyone
open.
says, "Oh, but it had a clown in it," so I thought,
it advertises what it wants to be, and it then has to deliver what it promises, and it promises shocking gore. And if you pay to see shocking gore, you're going to get your money's worth in a movie like this.
It doesn't have to break out beyond, Maxine numbers, which also did about as much as the first two did combined, but cost a lot more, but whatever. But I would not be surprised if this plays like a genuinely mainstream film. We'll see. Doesn't have to. There's already a fourth one in the works. Maybe he'll go to Hawaii. Maybe he'll go to space. I don't know. But yeah, I'm excited to see how this one plays because this is a genuinely grassroots success.
I struggle to call something like Terrifier 3 IP. I struggle to call it a franchise. It's a grassroots IP. It's a grassroots franchise. It's a sort of film that has fought for everything it's gotten, and I wish it well in the marketplace. Let's move on to the next weekend here that we have. We go back to the horror genre as we get closer to Halloween. From Paramount, the sequel to Smile, the appropriately named Smile 2. Again, I think the budget here doesn't create unrealistic expectations for this to hit a break even. I'm happy that a movie like this comes in as a genre play this time in the calendar. We didn't really have this in recent years. Right now, I think the tracking has this between 20 and 40 million, the Smile sequel. Did anybody here watch the first Smile? I didn't.
I liked it. It was good. It was solid. It's solid.
My wife liked it more than I did, which is important when discussing commercial prospects. This is a film that was a sequel to a breakout success, and it's clear that they got, the filmmakers got more money this time. in
Yeah.
the theater. And in fact, it's kind of pitching itself as, how most horror movies are, mostly in one location and never goes anywhere and is as cheap as humanly possible. This ain't that. And I think Paramount, to its credit, did the same thing with A Quiet Place Day One, where it was a spinoff that cost more than the first two films, respectively. But it sold itself as, this is a horror film that you need to see in a theater because we spent New York money on this puppy. And I think that's one reason among many why it broke out this summer. So I
That's
think
a good point.
I wonder if we joke about like Trap and Smile too. Like, it's weird. We have two horror thriller adjacent movies happening with the hook of a big arena superstar situation. I wonder.
That's not a bad comp here for Smile 2. 80, 85 million. I think that might be where this lands on its domestic run. What does have higher expectations here, the third and apparently final entry of the Venom spinoff, Venom: The Last Dance. I mean, I'm shocked there's three of these because I've seen the first two films. I don't remember them. I don't know what happens in those movies. They weren't 80 minutes long. They're just very forgettable movies that exist on like TNT or USA at like Sunday at 11 a.m. I don't know what that says about Venom: The Last Dance, other than the first two movies made. Is this true, Rebecca?
213.5 is what both 1 and 2 made. I mean, I saw the second at a drive-in. It was a perfect drive-in movie. It's something that, like, if I didn't have a subscription card, I don't know that I would spend $20 to see it in a theater. But because I do have a subscription card, I'm probably going to see it.
I'm going to put Chad on the spot. Chad, name one character in the Venom movies that isn't Venom.
Michelle Williams?
No, that's an actor. That's an actor. Yeah, I mean, I've seen both those movies. I have no idea what they're about.
I've seen them too. I couldn't say.
The Bodega Lady.
Carnage.
Oh, yeah.
Bodega Lady.
Carnage. There we go. One of them is
absolutely should have been in Deadpool 3. I'm sorry. If you're going to do the Sony Fox nutcase stuff, she is the one fun character that I want to see in all the multiverse stuff. But I digress.
Yeah, I just thought, and the multiverse stuff for me is a question mark because if I remember correctly, the Venom sequel ends with there being a hint of a crossover between the main Sony Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man universe and these movies. Are they going to follow that up?
I got the impression that it was more of a wink, wink. Like, you thought we were really going to do this? Like, it was more jokey than trying to set something else up.
Sony's post-credit sequences have been the greatest troll on the superhero discourse industrial complex. Whether it's the ridiculous post-credit scene from Morbius, which has Michael Keaton show up, even though it's how that was that even possible. To, if you recall, the credit cookie for Venom 2 has Tom Hardy showing up in the MCU.
I can't keep track, man. I can't keep track. These movies come out, and I have to sit through these credits, and Blorb the Conqueror shows up and says, I found the Rock of Zorg. Okay, man, like, who cares about this crap, honestly?
Yes, and that's why I like because they're making fun of this stuff. They're disposable entertainments. They're a throwback to a time before these things were like, but should it get a Best Picture nomination? It's like, no, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Sony re-releasing Morbius is the funniest thing that's happened in the history of theatrical
trolling everybody. We all fell for it.
The meme was that no one saw it.
Yeah,
like, that was the meme, and then they're like, re-release it. Like, it ruins the joke if you've seen it.
Having fun.
Well, we are expecting great numbers from Venom: The Last Dance. That's something that we have to mention.
That is a franchise that has entertainment value and popularity unto itself, regardless of whether you care about superhero movies, regardless of whether you care about Spider-Man. Because people will show up for that movie because they like the specific, only in this franchise, value of Tom Hardy going full Tom Hardy.
And I trust that it is a like contained sequel. Yeah. Like, I trust that it is, and that's a rare trilogy rather.
And also a good reason to be optimistic for a success is that it's a rare case of a female writer getting upgraded to director status and directing a comic book movie that isn't about a female superhero.
Well, we've got a $70 to $100 million opening weekend tracking. At this point, of course, it's going to get a lot tighter on what is going to open as we get closer to release. But listen, if this opens to 70 to 100, it's going to be good. There was a point in time earlier in the year where we thought Joker would walk away with the October box office crown. It is now becoming clearer and clearer that audience is actually Venom: The Last Dance audience, a PG-13 sequel that seems to deliver on fan expectations on what they're buying a ticket for.
If it makes $213.5 million domestically, I'm going to be thrilled. If we get a trilogy where they're all three the same amount,
there has to be some sort of like sports betting odds on that. That'd be wonderful. But yeah, we can only hope. And that pretty much is the entire October wide release slate. Well, guys, thank you so much for your input and analysis. Once again, here on our table, we have Rebecca Pahle, Chad Kennerk, and Scott Mendelson joining us to talk about the October preview at the box office. Well, thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.